Hey everyone, this is Jen and you are watching BPD Woman. On this channel, I discuss with you how to live your life more effectively when you live with borderline personality disorder. On this channel, I will talk about ways to effectively manage your emotions, understand why they occur as they do, use skills like DBT, and other tools to help you lead a more effective life in whatever way that may be, whether they are your goals in life, love, career. My goal is to help you be more effective and share my experiences living with borderline personality disorder. So if that sounds good to you, click subscribe below and hit the bell so that you never miss a beat. I produce several videos each week, probably around 3 to 5, and so if you feel like never missing one, and I hope you do, please hit the subscribe button. So, as I always preface, I am not a clinician or a doctor or a therapist. However, I am someone who has lived with borderline personality disorder for the last 20 years since I was diagnosed, and I can answer a very important question that a therapist or a clinician, or at least most therapists and clinicians, cannot answer, which is, what is it like to live with borderline personality disorder? So that sounds good to you. Let's keep going. All right. So today's video was actually requested by Kim. So thank you, Kim, for this suggestion. I am going to produce a video today that talks about explaining BPD to your family and friends, and let's pretend like they have never heard of the disorder, which they probably haven't, as most people have, and how to better explain it to them. So this video is entitled, Why Are You Like That? Explaining BPD to Friends and Family. So I'm gonna be referencing some notes here, so if I look away from all of you, that is what I will be doing. So again, thank you for tuning in. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what it feels like briefly to have borderline personality disorder, kind of as an overview, and then I'm going to go into some specific questions and then answer those questions that I have often heard family and friends or other parties interested ask, and give my perspective and answer to those questions in the hopes that they may be of help or use or information to your family, friends, and loved ones. So let's dive right in, shall we? Okay. The first thing, for a long time, trying to explain what borderline feels like is a really complex task, because it's hard to write it in 140 characters or less, right? The best way that I can describe borderline personality disorder is in the following way. Borderline personality disorder is the equivalent of having emotional fibromyalgia. So if you are not familiar with what fibromyalgia is, it is a disorder of the physical body. I believe it's an autoimmune disorder where your nerves are overactive and they produce more signals, more activity. Forgive me, I'll put up some information here. I don't exactly know the etymology of fibromyalgia, but essentially the person that lives with fibromyalgia, that suffers with fibromyalgia, feels a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort that is physically real, but it has no explainable source. So, your arm may really, really hurt, right? It could be crippling pain. You may not be able to move it, but you go to your doctor and there's nothing wrong. Your muscles are fine. There's not a sprain. It's not broken. There's no real reason to explain why your arm feels so bad. The doctor can't find anything wrong with it. However, the nerves under your skin are literally getting on your nerves and creating all of this pain, okay? It's essentially like having an exposed nerve. That's what it's like to have borderline personality disorder, except We have emotional fibromyalgia, which means instead of overactive nerves, we have overactive feelings, overactive moods, overactive thoughts, racing thoughts. Something that feels like a 1 or a 2 to you is a 9 or a 10 to us. Have you ever gone into the emergency room and they'll ask you in triage, say you go because you think you broke your toe or something. You go to the emergency room and then the nurse in the triage, before you see the doctor, will say to you, how would you describe your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, I don't know. I generally describe it like 9 to 11. So think of that. The rest of this video, the loved ones that are tuning in, I primarily speak to those of us with borderline, but this channel is for anyone that is interested in obtaining more information. As you watch this video, please try to keep that in your mind. This emotional fibromyalgia, this overactive emotion that causes intense pain, intense discomfort, that is both confusing to the person who has it and to others. You can't see it, but it's there. That's essentially what I want to communicate. As a general rule, people with borderline personality disorder are emotionally reactive and usually present with the following symptoms. They have more intense emotions, that are felt higher than, say, the average non-borderline. Those feelings feel more intense, they last for longer, and it is more difficult for us to come back to baseline after a dysregulating event. So let's say for you, it's raining outside. For us, it's a typhoon, Your grandmother passes away, you go through the regular grieving process, maybe eventually you're able to live with the pain in 6 months. For us, that could take years. Perhaps you break up with someone, your marriage ends, it's devastating, but after 6 months, a year, however long, you've kind of moved on, you've healed. For us, that healing process may take twice as long. For those of you that want to explain borderline to your family or friends, I do have another video. Take a look at it if you wish. It is called Should I Share My Diagnosis? And it kind of gives you my experiences and of what I see as the pros and cons of sharing and not sharing that diagnosis with others. When you are feeling different, it can feel shameful. When you feel different from others, when you know that you act different from others, when you know that you cry more than others, or you're more sensitive than others, or it takes you longer to calm down, it can feel very demoralizing, and it keep you feeling stuck. I want you to know that there isn't too much of a difference between people with borderline personality disorder and those without it. The major difference, aside from being a more sensitive person, is that we do have maladaptive behaviors, And that essentially means that we solve problems ineffectively. That's a quick way to describe what maladaptive behaviors are. But I want you to know that all of the things that you feel, that you think, that you worry about, non-borderlines feel them too. They just are less sensitive to them and they have more effective problem-solving skills. Borderline personality disorder, I'll put up a little screenshot here from the Mayo Clinic. I'm going to use them as my source today. I really like them. Check them out. As you see, borderline personality disorder, if you were to Google it, is very common. It's very common. Something like 3 to 5% of the American population has borderline personality disorder. That's more people than have COVID, And it feels like COVID's everywhere, right? Well, borderline personality disorder is very common. When you are a loved one or a parent or a spouse and you are wanting to know more about the disorder and you want to help your loved one, I just want to caution you on the following. Please try to find vetted, educational, reliable sources of information that are written by experts. And by experts, I mean people who are dedicated to studying, researching personality disorders, those that run DBT courses, that are trained DBT counselors. They are specialized. They are not just like a regular therapist. They have to attend extra training to become a DBT therapist. Read books that are non-judgmental in their views. For the love of God, I beg of you, and I am an atheist, try to stay off places like Quora and Reddit, because there is a lot of negative misinformation where a lot of trolls like to hide out under cute little screen names and give misinformation. So, and I'll put up a link here. There's a video entitled Resources for BPD, and I offer to you my list of credible websites, books, and programs that I endorse and that I find helpful and professional. Okay, let's get into it. For both the person with borderline and for the person tuning in that wants to know more about borderline, I want to say the following before we get into this Q&A. Borderline personality disorder, as you can see from the Mayo Clinic's description, is also called emotional regulation disorder. Borderline is a scary emotional word that simply does not explain what the disorder is. Primarily, the disorder is a ineffectiveness at managing emotions and problem solving due to emotional dysregulation, fluctuating mood swings. Borderline provokes in me like scary red, like in neon graffiti, borderline. Like on the borderline of what? At one point in the 50s, 60s, when we didn't know as much as we know now, 60, 70 years ago, they thought the people living with a disorder were living on the borderline of psychosis and reality. Well, now we know that's not true. So why the term borderline has stuck, I don't know. We've evolved other terms, right? We don't call people, it's crass to call someone, colored. We've moved on to African American. We don't describe homosexuals or gay people as fags anymore, right? We have evolved from emotional, abusive language over the years, and thus I feel that there should be a change to change the term borderline personality disorder, which you'll see the Mayo Clinic is taking the lead here. There's a lot of push. Hopefully in the next 10 years we will have a change. I digress. The second thing that I want to say is that those with borderline, so you, your parents, I want them all to understand, your loved ones, we are humans. We don't have borderline personality disorder. We have Jen, we have Sam, we have Mike, we have Chloe. We are people, just like anyone else. There's nothing different, we're not X-Men. We don't have gills. All a personality disorder truly is a set way of behaviors and thought patterns that are maladaptive. They're distorted. They're ineffective. The good news about borderline personality disorder is that there is more research, more literature, more tools, more dedicated experts now than ever before, and more so on borderline personality disorder than any of the other, I want to say 12 or 15 personality disorders are out there. And I often say this, and I'm not being flip, if you have borderline personality disorder, congratulations, because there are more resources out for you, there are more reliable experts out there, and you have one of the disorders that has one of the higher remission rates. You can get better. All right. So I want to run through some questions that I have heard over the years that I have also kind of, stepping out of myself, have thought, what would look confusing to someone that didn't have the disorder? What does that look like? So here it goes. What is borderline personality disorder? Well, as I just mentioned, think of it as having emotional fibromyalgia. It is a pattern of maladaptive thinking and behaviors that are based in cognitive distortions. It is known in many groups recently among clinicians and experts as emotional dysregulation disorder. It is also very closely tied to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. If you put complex post-traumatic stress disorder, borderline personality disorder side by side, you will see a lot of symptoms, both heavily based in trauma, which goes into our next question. Where did borderline come from? Why did you get it? How do you have it? How come? Why? There are a few theories. I'm going to talk about two of the prominent ones that I most agree with. Marsha Linehan, who developed DBT and who herself has borderline personality disorder, she, in her most updated DBT skills manual training that I have seen, this was now 4 years ago, something like that, 5 years ago, says that those with borderline personality disorders have two things that usually lead to the development of the disorder. One, a temperance of high sensitivity, emotionalness. Perhaps in a baby it presents it's a clingy child, or a baby with colic, a sensitivity that is higher than seen in most others, coupled with a traumatic, invalidating environment that has been sustained. It is very common, it's almost exclusive, that those with borderline personality disorder have experienced sexual, emotional, physical abuse, have lived in environments where one or both parents were unavailable, whether that was physically or emotionally. They grew up in fear. They grew up in an invalidating environment, which means that in my case, my father would say things like, well, I'm sorry that you feel that I hit your mother and tried to kill her. That never happened. It's essentially, a trying to etch a sketch away your reality. It's also called gaslighting. The other common theory as to why people develop BPD is through genetics, and this is not really something that I get behind. This is really in its infancy, but they say that, the experts say that there is a link that it's passed down from family member to family member. Well, my argument to that is that, and you can watch another video I have here, which is a video that's based on where your BPD really came from. You can check out this discussion more in depth in that video. BPD is not a mood disorder. We have mood disorders, which are chemical in their origin. So major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, depression, those are born out of chemical imbalances in the brain, like serotonin. So, medicines like Prozac and Zoloft, they are prescribed to help treat mood disorders. Personality disorders is just learned behavior, The way you learn how to bake a cake is the way that you grow up to bake a cake and teach others how to bake a cake. So I argue that it's not genetics, but it's a passing down of behaviors. Okay. I know that, and I hope that if you're a parent, you're still tuned in. I know that that can be upsetting to hear, that essentially you caused your child's personality disorder. However, the proof is pretty indisputable. If your child grew up with you between the ages of 0 and 3 or 4, that is when the major development of the brain and personality developed. So it's not to demonize you. It's not to say, you and your child cannot have a healthy relationship, but this is the evidence. And don't take my word for it. You could just go ahead and Google it. What does it feel like to have BPD? It feels like a lot all the time. It feels like, on my art banner of my channel, it says, I don't know what I'm feeling, but there's a lot of it. That's pretty much the 411 on that. Those of us with BPD often have a super high emotional sensitivity. We are often in states of worry, hypervigilance. We think distorted thoughts. We use black and white thinking. We think most people are our enemy. At least I do. We feel a lot of fear and shame from our personality disorder. We know that we are different. We feel that we are different. We know that we get a side eye every now and then. It can feel very draining. It can feel lonely. That's been my experience. Doesn't feel great, I can tell you that. When you're in the low lows, it can feel really bad. Can it be changed? Yes, it can. This is like the most excellent news. As I mentioned, personality disorders are a result of maladaptive behaviors. Thus, change the behavior, change the personality disorder. You are never going to fully change your personality. You are who you are. I am a funny person that's extroverted and I like the ocean. That's never going to change. However, the way that I interact with other people, solve situations, which in turn, lead me to have a more effective life, can be changed. I can control that. The treatment, what is the treatment? Well, the treatment primarily is dialectical behavior therapy. You'll see, I'm going to put up a thing here from the Mayo Clinic of other recommended treatments. But the primary, the one, if you are really serious about tackling your borderline, is to get into a DBT class, which stands for dialectical behavior therapy. It is a 20 to 24 week round of intensive therapy that meets 2 times a week in a group setting for 90 minutes, where skills training, homework is talked about and discussed in a group of usually no more than 8 to 10. Again, you can check out my resources video for what to look for in a good DBT class. And the person attending DBT will also meet with a therapist once a week. So true DBT, a person enrolls in DBT twice a week. They attend a 90-minute class with 8 to 10 other people in DBT, normally those with borderline. It is run by a psychologist and a co-leader, another psychologist that are trained in borderline personality disorder and the treatment of dialectical behavior therapy. And the person also meets one-on-one with a therapist once a week for an hour. That is a requisite. You must. This is done for a period of 20 to 24 weeks, and then it is suggested that the person enrolled in DBT repeats it, and that's because practice makes perfect. You're going to get a lot of information thrown at you, you're going to be practicing a lot, and then they want you to do it again. If money was no object, I would say do it 4 times in a row to really get it. Okay. Why do your moods change so much? That's a good question. Why do your moods change so much? I know that it can be very off-putting to see a person that you love or a coworker wake up in the morning, be happy, and then by lunchtime, they're fucking pissed at the world. And then at 2 p.m., they've had a donut and a coffee that their friend bought them, and they're feeling better. But then at 6 p.m., they're still at work, and they're angry about that, and then they're angry again. Those with borderline personality disorder have a high emotional lability, which is the fluctuation of moods. again, remember that as we experience things, that fibromyalgia, we experience things more intensely for longer with a longer time to get back down to baseline. So for us, when we feel something, boom, it hits us, and it takes a while for it to leave. Think of it as like this kinetic energy, like when you shake a Coke bottle and it fizzes. If you were to open it right away, what would happen? It would splurt all out. But if you slowly removed the cap, or you waited 20 minutes and then opened it, it wouldn't explode all over you, right? That's sort of an analogy to explain what it's like to feel all this pent-up emotion and why they change so much. It's called emotional lability, and DBT is designed to help reduce the emotional lability. Why do you argue so much? Again, this goes back into emotional lability. However, for my money, I was often invalidated so much growing up, as those with BPD were. No, that didn't happen to you. I can do whatever I want to you. If you hear that for 18 to 20 years, and then you're 22, and then you grow into your 20s and your 30s and your 40s and beyond, for me, the opposite happened. And I was like in people's face, like, you will not take my rights. I want to feel this way. I'm entitled to this. And it can be very off-putting to people because they're like, well, couldn't maybe you just say that and not yell it at me? Yes, I think that if we grew up with people that weren't always yelling at us or that we felt invalidated by, yes, I'm sure that we could ask for things in a much calmer manner. Unfortunately, for most of us anyway, I can only speak from my own experience. I believe that because of my emotional ability and my changing moods and my desire to get my point across and not have my rights trampled on anymore, or have these little injustices keep happening to me, I come out strong so that people are like, oh my God. Now, sure, in some situations that can be very helpful, right? Like if you feel physically in danger, then I want those people to be afraid of me. Yes, I want them to read my face and say, don't mess with me. However, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I don't want to communicate that. So the goal, again, for those with BPD is to work on using DBT, and there's a whole module about 6 to 8 weeks that just talks about interpersonal effectiveness, how to talk to people, understanding why we argue so much. We don't want to. We really don't. We do not wake up. I promise you, we do not wake up, even though it may feel like this. We do not wake up and then say, let me think of how many arguments I can get into today. Just doesn't. It's all about reining in the emotions and slowing everything down. If we were able to slow the thinking and how the quickness of the emotion came out, I would say 90% of these flare-ups would dissipate, because we would think, is it really worth my time to get in this argument right now? Is this really where I want my energy to go for the day? It can happen. I certainly argue less now, keeping in mind that sometimes there are other people that those of us just don't get along with. And for borderlines who have low self-esteem, it can be hard for us to leave relationships that are toxic, and therefore we find ourselves engaging in more conflict. That's another reason. Why do you cut yourself? Here's another question. Why do you drink? Why are you so self-destructive? Why can't you just stop these behaviors? The primary research on self-mutilation or cutting, for me, it was cutting on my arm. There's another video you can check out, BP, self-harm, why we do it, how to stop. For those that are engaging in self-harm, it's usually to feel a sense of relief and to stop the pain emotionally we're feeling by transferring it to a physical part. Imagine again that analogy of those nerves acting up and you can't see those nerves. Well, if you cut your arm open, you could see something, can't you? For me, anytime that I cut myself, I felt a sense of relief, finality, euphoria. No, self-harm is not the same as suicide, although it does have another term, suicidal ideation. It's usually what you'll hear cutting called. People will also burn themselves, pull out their hair, punch themselves in the face, slam their head against a wall. They'll drink, they'll smoke. All those self-destructive behaviors that I just named, of which I did many, the drinking, the drug abuse, I've been sober now over a decade, come from mostly shame, internal pain, low self-esteem, and wanting to remedy our feelings and our pain by feeling something physical. That's why. Why do you get into relationships so quick? Also, why is your boyfriend or girlfriend such a bum? Again, those of us with BPD, we seek a lot of validation. Eventually, hopefully, in DBT and with time, you will learn how to validate yourself more so that you say to yourself or ask yourself the question, what do I think about me? Rather than, what do I think they think about me? It's about feeling good about yourself and not having others tell you that you're good. But that can be very hard, and I still struggle with it. I certainly have not erased out every symptom of borderline from my life. But we get into relationships quickly for a few reasons. One, we need help. We might need a person to live with. This is when I was much younger, 18 to 21. We may need someone to live with. We may be desperate. We may just want to get out of our parents' house or whatever other environment we are in. It can also be explained by having problems with financial instability, in part maybe due to your borderline, that forces you into certain situations. Certainly, when I think of some of my past relationships, at the time, I genuinely thought I was moving in because I was in love and it was the right thing to do. I think there was also an undercurrent of some desperation. I don't have the money to live on my own. What am I going to do? That's changed now. Now I'm in a position where I've been financially independent and I live on my own, and it's not a problem. But that was not always the case. Also, those of us with borderline can be impulsive, have emotional ability, have a tendency to attract emotional vampires because we are so emotive and we have so much empathy. And we have an idea of love. We want a relationship. But again, it's hard for us to rein in the emotions and think more in a wise mind to make healthier choices when it comes to partners. We tend to link up with people who are not as smart as us, who may have substance abuse problems, who are narcissistic, who take more than they give. Because of our low self-esteem and our vulnerability to needing external validation, we let a lot of people through that door that shouldn't come through that door. Which leads into another question. Why do you have so many boyfriends or so many girlfriends or so many friends that keep rotating? Same explanation. If we think about going to a job interview, you go through how many rounds of job interviews? 3, 4. Now consider, I think that's a good analogy. What would a person without BPD, how would they enter relationships? They would take it slow. They would review the resume. They would, go on lots of dates or what we call interviews and see if this person isn't a match. And it would, knowing that, man, it's going to be 6 months to 2 years before I really get to know who this person is. Take the same analogy with someone with BPD and pretend like they've never even seen the resume, but they give them the job. They give the boyfriend the job or the girlfriend the job. And then we get in these relationships. We find out who they really are. We've given them more trust than they have legitimately earned or deserve. Conflicts arise. They make us feel bad. We make ourselves feel bad. It blows up. They leave. I think, I've burned through many relationships and friendships and boyfriends. And I would say, probably 50% of them should never have been there in the first place. All right. Do borderlines have empathy? Whew, yeah, gosh. Woo, more than I can contain. Sometimes it can be a detriment. It can be a superpower, it can be a detriment. You give. That plays into this other part about letting people in who don't really deserve the place to be there, and giving them your empathy and your resources, your love, your attention, your gifts, your time, your memes, your love, your sex, that don't deserve it, right? And there is a lot of negativity and misinformation that BPDs can't love, BPDs don't have empathy. Whew, man. I have heard, I don't mean to be crass, but I have, almost every boyfriend that I've ever had has said, something to the following effect, like, you have loved me more than anyone else has ever loved me. The lovemaking with you is the best that I've ever had. It's been the most intense that I've ever had. You're so thoughtful. The gifts you give are so wonderful. You're always a cheerleader for me. I don't know where this idea that borderlines don't have any empathy came up. However, I can hypothesize that since borderlines can become very dysregulated and then very inward and obsessed with, why did that person say this? Like, am I a piece of shit? Like, why do I feel so much shame? It can look very self-centered. But we're not. We're just stuck, and we can't pull in the reins of that emotion. We're just stuck. So it's not that there's a lack of empathy. And again, reining in the emotions can be solved with DBT. Cool. Are you aware of what you're doing? Not all of the time. Maybe later. Again, the goal of therapy is to reduce emotional ability and provide yourself with more problem-solving skills. And if you do so, hopefully the result will be that you will have greater awareness, especially the mindfulness module of dialectical behavior therapy aims to target this exact question. Are you aware of what you're doing? Mindfulness helps us slow down. Why do you get so drained? Think about all of these fluctuating emotions and how we've described them. And now compare that to, say, running up and down a flight of stairs. You run up, you run down, you run up, you run down, you run up, you run down. All right, now I want you to think that you do that all day long. With, you get breaks, you get some food, but you do that all day long. How are you going to feel at the end of it? Exhausted. And that's why. Why are you always so angry? Inappropriate, intense, angry outbursts. Common displays of anger are very common with those of us with BPD. It is listed in the DSM as a trait of borderline. Again, we're talking about emotional lability, we're talking about emotional dysregulation, and we are talking about a impulse problem. You put all three of those together, it can be a real powder keg. The idea, again, along with DBT, and I highly recommend anger management. I have probably just as many anger management books as I do borderline books. I have attended anger management classes as well. I think it's a wonderful supplement. If you're in DBT, go ahead and enroll yourself in anger management if anger is a problem for you. Again, we tend to split in this black or white thinking, so we think if we've had one explosive anger, we must be all bad. But the key word here is anger management and not anger abolishment. And when we learn more about why we've become angry, which is usually a secondary emotion to an injury or a feeling such as shame, sadness, regret, loss, you'll start to see that there are other ways to express that feeling. But again, because of the emotional ability, the exposed raw nerves, the fluctuating moods, it can be difficult. And I know it's off-putting. I do. And believe me, as someone who struggles with lots of anger issues over the years, although it's gotten progressively better for me, I still have a lot of shame. And when I get angry, I still get stuck with it, like, I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Like, why did I do that? That's not what I wanted to do. But I also forgive myself, and I also recognize that I'm a human being. Okay. Why do you think that? That's not what I meant. Why did you interpret it that way? Cognitive distortions are hand in hand with maladaptive behaviors, aka personality disorders. Maladaptive behaviors are not just patterns of behavior, they're also patterns of thought, right? You think, therefore you are. So over the years, we have learned to embrace thought patterns such as personalization, the thought that everything that is done around us must be as a result of us. If they're wearing a scowl on their face, then it's because we're a piece of shit. If, we didn't get a job promotion at work, it's because we're not any good at what we do, etc. So we use these cognitive distortions walking around in our life, and we need to challenge them. And again, part of the DBT framework is to challenge common beliefs so that you can realize other interpretations. I have been asked this a lot. I can't believe you think that way. Why do you think that way? That's not what I said. You sometimes might have a conversation with someone with BPD. You both feel good about the interaction, but then maybe 3 days later, the borderline will come back to you. And now they no longer interpret the same interaction the same. Perhaps now they think that your very productive, positive conversation really was a passive-aggressive one, and you're a jerk. There's a lot of overthinking that goes on in our brains. And so we do have cognitive distortions. It is not up to you, the person without BPD, to convince us otherwise. Which leads into this other question. Do you want to get better? And how can I help? What can I do as the person that cares about you with borderline? The first thing I really recommend you do is keep boundaries. Love us, but don't tolerate anything. Not anything goes. If you're a parent and you feel guilty about a child's upbringing, don't compensate by letting them walk all over you. And also on the flip side, don't not engage with them in a healthy manner. There is a great book. I own it. I recommend it. It's called Loving Someone with Borderline Personality Disorder. It's by Dr. Sherry Manning, and it is the audience that it is intended for is you. The parent, the loved one, the spouse, the friend, the coworker, the non-borderline. How to understand it, how to react. You will hear a lot in this book about how not to invalidate someone. And it's useful even in conversations and interpersonal interactions you'll have with people who are not borderline. Wow, am I invalidating others? Like, am I quick to dismiss their thoughts? Even something as innocuous as, you're not fat, don't think that. You will learn what that does to someone with BPD. There are support groups. I have in the DB courses that I have been to, the same centers that specialized in borderline personality disorder treatment also offered seminars, weekend seminars that were aimed at just the family members of those with BPD. So no one else, just the family members. That's another resource. Again, I say limit your resources to tried, true, vetted clinicians and therapists. Dr. Marsha Linehan, Sherry Manning. Again, you can check out my other video resources for those with BPD. I'll list books, I list apps, I list websites, what to look for in a good psychologist, an effective psychologist. we often fear, those of us with borderline, that you will leave us. You know, there's a very famous book. It's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. We have a core issue with abandonment and shame. And we are worried that, you know, you will not want us anymore. It's not your job, obviously, to sit there every day and be like, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you. But it would help if you could understand that perspective. For me, boundaries and being gently informed of when I've hurt someone or I've stumbled on a skill, that helps me. Things that don't help me are statements like, can't you just get better? Aren't you making a big deal of this? I don't have time for this. I mean, over the years, I've realized that not everyone's that invested in learning about my borderline. It is a lot. It can be overwhelming. Again, there's a lot of negative misinformation out there. I think, you know, I've met one person that has actually read the book that I gave them. Okay, so we all understand the expectations. It is not your job to change the person with BPD. These books and resources are merely some framework to help you understand it and also to offer perspective on how you may be contributing to a conversation in an invalidating manner. I hope this has been helpful. This is my longest video to date, but we got a lot out of it, and I hope you did too. Thank you for tuning in. There is hope with BPD, and there is hope for change. Thank you, every one of you, for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Until then, be well.